My name is Betty Campbell. I'm a dues-paying member of National Women's Liberation. I'm here to introduce the panels this morning, and the panels, this panel will look at 3 collaborative organizations with roots in rational feminists from the 1960s: Red Stockings, Gainesville Women's Liberation, National Women's Liberation, have continued to use conscious raising, personal experience, analyzing the movement experience directly and indirectly to continue to develop theories on which to improve strategies. I and the panelists was involved this past fall in a conference, the Shulamay Smith Firestone Memorial Conference. There we was taking the burning question, what to be done. Today we want to continue that conversation by looking at the things that we should continue to be doing. First, I would like to introduce Giardina. And when her names come to my mind, is that she's one of my strongest mentors. When I took her first class in the early 90s at the University of Florida, and the thing that we hit heads is that I just didn't see at the time where I fit in a women's liberation movement. And that one thing that she did for me, she challenged me to be the change that I wanted to see. And also I challenged her to be the change to help me be who I needed to be. And I have to really say this woman went out her way to teach me not only about myself as a female and what my needs in society, but she also took and educated me more about my African American side than my own parents, because it's that she recognized that some things in me I had never seen before, like outdoor bathrooms, and that experience changed me, and I wouldn't be who I am today without that experience. And on that note, I really would like to introduce Giardina.
I'm ready to fight and learn how to fight. We all better be. Are you ready? Are you ready?
It's not loud enough. You gotta get some energy.
I think I can safely say for all of us on this panel that the major premise of this panel, and probably of the whole conference, is that women's liberation hasn't been won yet. Although some important advances have come out of the revolutionary moment of the 1960s and the early 1970s, we're going backward on many of the important advances that we won then, especially abortion. Other advances that are needed, we've barely begun to make progress on at all, at least in the United States. How the movement can regain the radical and revolutionary spirit and ideas, the audacity, the unity, the mass participation of the years in which we made the biggest and most collective breakthroughs for women, how we can go on the offensive again and make some collective leaps for all women, is what we on this panel have been collaborating on. I'm going to tell you a little bit about one such project, a women's liberation class. Why a class? Well, you see, we no longer think that the revolution, in other words, full women's liberation, is going to happen all in one fell swoop of final perfection. I seriously thought in 1968 that in probably 5 years, we'd get it. This time, we're going all the way. The Red Stockings 1969 manifesto over-optimistically put this very common idea at the time. And even today, final perfection in one fell swoop. It was somewhat arrogant, too, in a youthful sort of way, as Red Stockings was implying that earlier generations of feminists hadn't even maybe wanted to go all the way, hadn't been committed to that, instead of what was far more likely, that they just hadn't been able to because of the objective conditions at the time, and perhaps one of those conditions being that the women's liberation movement didn't have enough experience yet to learn everything that was needed to get all the way to full freedom. We've come to learn that our experience in the women's liberation movement, as well as the history of revolutions generally, show that although a revolution is a big change, a great leap forward as opposed to a little step, none of the revolutions have gone all the way to full liberty and justice for all. In each revolution, at least some of the revolutionaries have tried to consciously learn from the earlier ones. In the French Revolution, they tried to learn from the American Revolution, and the Bolshevik Revolution tried to learn from the French. So we in Red Stockings have learned that we're not alone in this realization. This understanding that trial and error and learning is necessary and is part of a long revolutionary tradition, a radical heritage. People who call themselves radicals, as opposed to being called radicals by others, know that the word radical comes from the Latin word for root, getting to the root of problems in understanding and in solving problems at their root in action, in practice. But figuring out the root and testing in practice what you've figured out isn't easy. It takes time and sometimes many attempts and evaluating the attempts. This process amounts to taking a scientific approach to the liberation struggle, to revolution, as many activists among oppressed people have come to realize. And part of being radical and scientific about achieving full liberation means recognizing that the struggle is a learning process, that more than one revolution is going to be needed to go all the way to freedom, equality, and justice. I want to say that this learning process, when you experience it in exciting, positive times, is so intellectually and emotionally exciting and interesting. It's like being in love. It's a passion. Even in hard, painful times of disappointments and mistakes, once you realize that there is inevitably a need for learning, it becomes very absorbing and engaging, the most challenging thing there is to do. I had the immeasurably good fortune of being recruited into the women's liberation movement by my political teacher, Judith Brown, in the revolutionary moment of 1968. That year, I represented Gainesville Women's Liberation, the first women's liberation group in the South, at the Miss America pageant protest. And here I am, the second person holding up I have a little mini dress on. I was scared that people would think we were just doing this because we weren't as beautiful as Miss America, so I tried to look. My sign says, can makeup cover the wounds of our oppression? And the New York Times called us girl revolutionaries, right? We're on the boardwalk picketing in front of the pageant. When I got back to Gainesville, I got fired from my job because an article about me at the protest appeared in the local newspaper. I was banned from state and university jobs and was told that I had a permanent record, and those of you my age will remember this permanent record that we were always getting bad marks on, right? I had a permanent record of what the authorities labeled sabotage of the Miss America pageant. That's a quote. I'm proud of that. I continue to organize for women's liberation, but now I know full well that it's not going to come easily and perfectly in one fell swoop. I now know that work and struggle are needed, and lots of collective learning from our work and struggle is needed for that to happen. In the early stages of realizing all this, I remembered that Gainesville Women's Liberation had given a women's liberation class in 1969, and I came up with the idea for doing this again. I'm going to read from the flyer for the new class and what virtually every flyer has said in the nearly 25 continuous years that we've been giving the new class. That was beginning in 1991 in Gainesville, Florida, where I was then living and working closely with Redstockings, helping its Archive for Action and the catalog for the archives to come into being. Okay, the class flyer expresses some of the basic ideas of the class, and I'm going to quote from the class flyer now. This class is for women who want to understand the basic truths of how we are held back on the job, in the classroom, in public life, and in the home, how a feminist movement was organized to change this, what we can learn now to build the kind of movement that can put the male chauvinist establishment on the run again, and how each woman can contribute to this effort. The class will teach the radical ideas and methods that sparked the rebirth of the feminist movement in the 1960s through a combination of lecture, discussion of readings, consciousness raising, testifying, and then acting together on what we've learned. You will learn about the heroic struggle women have waged, individually and collectively, for our survival and our freedom, the political causes of the unhappiness in our daily lives, women's progress owing to the feminist movement, and how to use this information to change conditions for women. This class is not about personal liberation through improved self-esteem or an alternative women's culture, nor is it about recalling a golden age of matriarchy. It's not about how feminism can save the planet, nor is it about achieving status in the present corrupt system through individual self-improvement or lifestyle changes. The following will be covered: the origins of women's liberation and how these truths have been buried, consciousness raising, get to the root of sexism, who benefits, who pays, the fight for abortion rights as an example of how feminist gains have been won and lost, radical feminist theory, what is radical? What is a radical feminist analysis? What is male supremacy? Women, work, and money. How organizing on new radical feminist theory on the social wage, which Marisa will talk to you about a little more pretty soon, free public child care, parental leave, national health care, how these things can be a springboard toward women's liberation. So that's the announcement for the class. In 1999, Redstockings began giving the class in New York City. There will be one in New York City this fall. So when the sign-up sheet, who's got the sign-up sheet here? This sign-up sheet is going to come around. Should be coming around now. When the sign-up sheet comes your way, indicate on it if you want us to contact you about the class in New York City. For reading primary material, the class depends on the Redstockings Women's Liberation Archives for Action, whose purpose and motto are history for activist use. If you go to a university or you live in a town with a public library, you might ask your university department or your public library to order the Redstockings archives, which has now been microfilmed, and you get it. University libraries and public libraries in towns can order it, and this flyer people would pass around. Okay. History for activist use. Kathie Sarachild explains the idea of history for activist use in a discussion of the first 3 volumes of Stanton, Anthony, and Gage's History of Women's Suffrage. Quote, "Their view of history was not as past, as static, but of history as movement, as continuing struggle, a history of the present as well as the past, for the future. It is a history of the arguments and debates, not just to show progress, but how it came about. Theirs was a history to use, an arsenal for women, as they put it. It was a history by the activists, those who write history to change history." And that's how we think of history. broken down into, it's not this big dead thing of what happened next, what happened next. Instead of, it's something to draw lessons from. The class culminates with planning and taking an action. This is because we've learned that you can't really understand history to the point of using it in a practical way until you try to change it. We learned this from our own experience, but it was crystallized for us when Kathie Sarachild quoted Student Nonviolent Organizing Committee organizer Charlie Cobb in her article in The Power of History in Feminist Revolution. In SNCC's first Black history book, Cobb had said, quote, "Call it maybe a freedom-fighting history book, but before doing that, make a freedom fight." So here's the class, some of the freedom fight the class tries to teach people how to make. This is just some flyers and press coverage of a few of the class actions. This was one testifying about sex, right? And what, they made an enormous flyer out of their, that summarized their trouble getting guys to deal with birth control. And this flyer was about this big, and it got hung all over campus. This was 1995. This is action they took for the morning after pill over the counter, which Annie Tummino will be talking about in a little bit. They're marching. This is the Gainesville members of Campus Now and students in the Gainesville Women's Liberation 1997 class marched to the University of Florida Infirmary to protest their sexist practices on the morning after pill. You had to fill out some kind of a questionnaire, how many times had you had sex, and things that were nobody's business but your own. This is the student newspaper says, group protests UF's program, abortion instruction. Community course students, that's our class, right? Demand changes in OBGYN program. We were saying you've got to teach medical students how to give abortions and you're not doing it. The class ran through the hospital, passing out demands to teach medical students how to give abortions. Here's the class in New York City, one of the Red Stockings classes, just gathered up. And last but not least, this is a New York City action taken by one of the classes. They're fighting for the social wage, what we call the social wage. Stop tying health care to marriage. Women want single-payer health care. Myth of American equality health care. U.S. health care may be hazardous to your health, right? So, thank you very much. I hope to see you in the fall as we give the class again in New York City.
Next, we will have a real pioneer. I really admire this young woman. It's because she took on the federal government in the Bush administration and the Obama administration about the morning after pill for all girls and women over the counter without any restriction. Annie Tummino was the lead complainant. She was one of the 9 people that were arrested, and she fought for many years, and now we do have the morning after pill. So let's welcome Annie.
Hello, everybody. I'm really honored to be here and really glad that this conference has been organized. By day, I work as an archivist and a librarian.
So you don't have this stupid background.
I'm gonna put a picture up.
Okay.
Just pick one of the pictures.
There's the morning after.
All right, we'll leave a picture up. But outside of my paid work, I spend a lot of my time organizing with National Women's Liberation, which is a group I helped found. And we're really a new group, but we have old roots. We were formed out of a collaboration of members and organizers with Gainesville Women's Liberation in Florida and Red Stockings in New York City, which were two of the early and pivotal groups in the women's liberation movement, and that's part of what this panel is about. So we're a grassroots organization. We're made up of everyday women, and kind of like Carol said, we want to fight and we want to learn how to fight. Today, I'm going to talk about our recent successful campaign to win the morning after pill over the counter in the US. Is this something that people followed or kind of were aware of? Great. So we had 10 years of speakouts, consciousness raising, petition gathering, Flashmobs, and various forms of civil disobedience, combined with a lawsuit against the Food and Drug Administration that resulted in this major victory in 2013. And actually, you can see this image is from the 90s. So Gainesville Women's Liberation was already doing sort of more localized actions against sexist practices at infirmaries, on campus, things like that, which sort of informed our later decision to work on over-the-counter. I got involved myself early in 2004, shortly after I moved to New York City, and I did go on to get arrested with 8 other women in NWL, blocking the doors of the FDA in 2005, and became the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit filed with the Center for Reproductive Rights. And 8 other NWL members and several reproductive rights organizations were also part of that lawsuit. There were really a lot of ups and downs over those years, including partial victories, organizational changes among us, various delays, and court appeals by the government. And I don't want to get bogged down in all those details. So I'm going to try to focus on the bigger picture, why we thought this was an important women's liberation demand, and how we use the strategies and principles from the 60s movement in our organizing. And I'll also share a little bit about my own learning process and testimony. Just to make sure that everyone does know, the morning after pill is a slightly higher dose of birth control that can be taken up to after sex to prevent pregnancy. And we thought over-the-counter access was particularly significant because it was an opportunity to push for something big, an offensive gain during a time of so many rollbacks and attacks on birth control. And we felt having it right at our fingertips would be a huge improvement in terms of our ability to control our reproductive lives. By 2003, when the FDA first considered granting Plan B, which is a particular brand of the morning after pill, over-the-counter status, it was already available without a prescription in over 40 countries around the world. And that number increased to over 60 by the time we won this right through our lawsuit last year. And while you can take it up to 5 days after sex, it's most effective when taken within 24 hours. So when it was by prescription only, it was nearly impossible for most women to get the pill within that window of time, not to mention that a doctor's visit could be really expensive, especially if you didn't have health insurance. I myself have probably taken the morning after pill about 5 times over the last 10 years, and I've never had any side effects. And there was at least one time when I needed it and couldn't get it. I was out of state, and it was just impossible to figure out how to get to a doctor in that situation. It's a huge advance and victory that today, if I were in the same situation, I could just drive to the nearest pharmacy and purchase it. A year and a half ago, I also became a mother when I had my son, Enzo. And although parenting has brought much joy and reward into my life, it's also really actually made my commitment to abortion and birth control stronger. I mean, the idea that any man feels that he has the right to force me to do this just seems, into my core, more deeply outrageous than ever before. You know, I love my little son so much, he's wonderful, but it's also a financial strain, it's very hard work, and the double day, which is really a triple day since I continue to spend time on the movement, is very exhausting. And the system in the US, with lack of paid family leave, limited sick and vacation time, long work hours, and expensive privatized daycare certainly doesn't help. Now, the 60s demand for abortion was not about privacy, and not even really about women's health. It was about our self-determination, the idea that women as a group would never have more power unless we could control when and if we're having children. Now, for me, having grown up in an era of slogans just such as pro-choice, we won't go back, This women's liberation take on abortion was much more powerful and invigorating to me, and I really hadn't heard it until I worked with Red Stockings and GWL and learned the history of the abortion movement. I also really remember so clearly attending my first morning after pill speak out, which was in February of 2004 in New York City. Alex Leader, she's probably in this picture somewhere, who's now the chair of NWL and was a primary architect of our campaign, testified that she needed the morning after pill because the condom came off, she wasn't able to get it, and she ended up having an abortion, a decision that she felt very good about. And I had never heard women speak so frankly about sex and birth control in public before. This was far from polite. It was real. It really struck a chord in my own experience, and it made me want to get involved more. Consciousness raising and speakouts were a primary part of the Morning After Pill campaign, just as they were essential in spreading the women's liberation movement in the 1960s. CR, as it's often called, where women compare personal experiences to try to get to the political root of our problems, led to actions like the Miss America protest in '68, the first abortion speak out in '69, and seminal papers like The Politics of Housework and The Myth of the Vaginal Orgasm. Through CR, we found that women most frequently needed the morning after pill to back up condom use. And many women testified they couldn't tolerate the birth control pill because of side effects or didn't want to have to take it every day. And it's important to note that serious side effects that are sometimes associated with the pill come from daily, repeated, long-term use, whereas the morning after pill is the equivalent of taking 4 or 5. So even if you took it 2 times a year, that would be like taking 10 birth control pills as opposed to taking it in a regular regime. We also discovered that many of our male partners resisted wearing condoms, which is something you saw on the flyer that Carol put up. And it was a great relief to understand that this is a widespread political problem that we need to fight with men about, not just a personal problem to deal with individually. And many of us had also heard rumors that the morning after pill caused epic nausea and vomiting, which may have been slightly more true with earlier versions of it, but certainly wasn't true for most of us that had taken it. And it made us wonder if that was kind of a myth that was being built up to scare women. From Red Stockings, we used the idea of women are the experts, which was a rallying cry of the abortion movement. In 1969, when abortion was still illegal, a committee convened in New York City to consider revising the abortion laws. And the panel was to hear testimony from experts. Well, those experts consisted of 13 men and 1 woman who was a nun. Members of Red Stockings organized an action to storm in and disrupt the hearing. Was it Kathie that yelled out, "Let the real experts testify, women"? And about a month later, they held the first ever public abortion speak out at the Washington Square Methodist Church in New York City. To a crowd of 300 people, women testified about their painful experiences with back alley abortions, or having to bring a pregnancy to term and giving the baby up for adoption. Similarly, NWL members testified at the FDA hearings on Plan B in December of 2003. And we actually didn't have to bust in this situation because we were allowed. But the fact that we spoke directly about our experiences needing the morning after pill, the frantic struggle to find a provider and pay for the pill really sent shockwaves through the room, whereas everyone else was kind of citing scientific studies. We got national press attention from that. And we also unfurled a banner showing all of the other countries that already had morning after pill without a prescription. Red Stockings calls this strategy exposing the myth of America, puncturing this heavily hyped idea that the US is #1 in living standards and that US women are the most liberated. After the 2003 hearing, that scientific advisory committee that convened overwhelmingly recommended the morning after pill go over the counter for all women of all ages with no restrictions, so they agreed with feminists. But the FDA officials, under pressure from the Bush administration, which is something that we actually exposed through our lawsuit, engaged in a series of unnecessary delays. And in response, we kept up the pressure. We held a series of speakouts where women testified about problems accessing the morning after pill. And we also organized a Give Your Friend the Morning After Pill pledge. Thousands of women pledged they would commit the crime of giving a friend the pill when she needed it to get around the prescription requirement. And we felt we were making public what women were already doing, which was often if you had a pack of birth control pills, you could break it up and give some of them to a friend because it was so hard to actually get to a doctor and get a prescription. We also purchased packs of Plan B and threw them out to the crowd at protests, or did what we called the feminist pharmacy, where we asked women to step up and get their pack in defiance of the prescription requirement. One of the key insights of our campaign, also based on the abortion movement, was that just going for small reforms would not benefit the masses of women. The panel of so-called experts that Red Stockings interrupted in 1969 were considering small changes to the abortion laws. You could get an abortion if you already had 4 kids, if you were raped, or if you could get someone to say that you were mentally unstable. But feminists knew that those changes really wouldn't help most women. They were fighting for something much more fundamental, the complete repeal of all abortion laws. Roe, which instituted the trimester system, was actually a compromise from what radical feminists had demanded, to take abortion off the books and treat it like a simple medical procedure like any other. So similarly, some groups in the early 2000s were kind of fighting for some small changes on the morning after pill, getting it available in ERs, for example. But from doing CR, we really knew that that was not the situation, that most women, of course, yes, they should be able to get it in ERs, but most women got behind on their daily birth control pills and just had a mess up or something like that. And even those of us that had testimony about being sexually assaulted hadn't gone to the ER right afterwards. There were also groups focusing on a state-by-state approach, trying to get agreements where pharmacists could dispense it with a doctor's call. And we felt that was very limited, that some states would never pass such a law. The application was pending before the FDA at this very time. So the possibility of getting a national change that would really benefit all women was right there. It just needed a push from the masses of women that would really benefit from that. We also anticipated and opposed age restrictions from the very beginning, distributing a pamphlet on this as early as 2004. Lucinda Sisler, a brilliant leader of the abortion rights movement, wrote a paper in 1970 called Abortion Law Repeal, Sort of, A Warning to Women. And this was one of the papers that we read in study groups. And it talks about the dangers of allowing some groups of women to be bought off at the expense of others, and how eventually that just weakens the position of all women. And a lot of what she was predicting, unfortunately, came true in the form of parental consent laws, mandatory waiting periods, etc. We took the simple position that if you're old enough to be pregnant, you're also old enough to decide not to be pregnant. So in 2006, when the FDA, under fire from the movement and our lawsuit, ruled it would make the pill available in pharmacies, but only for women ages 18 and up, we were prepared to fight back. Not only was this ruling unscientific and a blatant violation of young women's rights, it also created obstacles for all of us, because we would have to show an ID and continue to ask a pharmacist for this pill instead of just picking it up off the shelf like Tylenol or anything else that you want to pick up at the store. So skipping ahead, finally last year in April, a federal court judge ruled on our side that morning after pill should be made available without a prescription or any point of sale or age restrictions within 30 days. And I should note, in addition to Center for Reproductive Rights, Andrea Costello, who's a longtime person working with National Women's Liberation, also represented us and just did amazing work as our movement lawyer on that project. Then Obama, who purports to be pro-birth control, appealed that decision. And we continued to protest. We did several flash mobs, as we call them in pharmacies, protesting this. And finally, the administration dropped the appeal. At this point, we are still continuing to monitor the status of the morning after pill. It's a bit complicated to go into the details, but there are generic forms of the morning after pill that are still trapped behind the counter or subject to unscientific labeling, saying that it's not supposed to be taken by young women. So we still need to fight on that. And it's also way, way, way too expensive. It usually costs between $40 and $50, which is totally out of reach for many people or a real stretch. And also just basically, even if you have the money, no one should have to pay that much money for a pill that costs that much to make and is so fundamental to our reproductive lives. So we're still working on that, and we're also working on how it's being sold, because too often pharmacies are locking it up, they're keeping it behind the counter, they're not actually putting it on the shelf. So there's still more work to do on the morning after pill, just as there's more work to do in this broader, unfinished women's liberation fight. But I think we can be really proud of this victory. In the words of Kathie Sarachild in Redstocking's book, Feminist Revolution, I hope you will join us to fight for what women really want. So talk to us after the panel is over about how you can get involved, and you can also visit our website, which is womensliberation.org. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Marisa Figueiredo. The thing that stand out most about when I first met Marisa is that warmth of that smile. It light up a room. And then when I learned about her is that from her coming from Brazil to America, she really got it. It's the first thing she did when she arrived in America. She translated the Redstocking Manifesto into Portuguese. Is that what that said to me when somebody realized that women in another country need to understand there needs to be, they could fight for not being oppressed. When you see somebody who get that global and that international concept, that's when we really begin to fight for women's freedom, because if one woman is oppressed, we all are oppressed. So I really see Marisa as being a pioneer in that area of recognizing that women around the globe need to be free.
Good morning, sisters and allies. I am fired up and ready to analyze, organize, and mobilize. Are you? A main reason that I've persevered in this movement for women's liberation was a Redstockings think tank resolution from decades ago that called for, we are now ready not only to expose and protest, but begin to propose and fight. I'm going to be touching upon what Redstockings calls our social wage strategy, some of how we came to it, and how we use consciousness raising to look at how these issues of the social wage impact our lives right now. I am here to make the case that winning the social wage advances, such as free quality childcare, national health care not dependent on jobs or a man or employers, paid parental leave, and a shorter work week, is a needed strategy that, when combined with building a power base through feminist organizing, can become a springboard toward full women's liberation. How will winning these programs move us closer to the full liberation of women? Because the lack of these programs here in the United States, because of the lack of these programs, women are tracked into unpaid care work within the family, work that the whole society benefits from, and in addition, women are made dependent on men and employers through the family wage system. We use the phrase full liberation for women and freedom, justice, and equality for all, that includes women in that all, as our goals, instead of terms like democracy, socialism, and communism, because those terms, taken at their best, do mean the full liberation, justice, freedom, and equality for all. We see the success of the struggle for full and complete liberation, justice, and equality for all women as the measure of the truth of those terms, democracy, socialism, or communism. We also see that the struggle for all of these has been a learning process, an unfinished, continuous learning process where we try things, see what happens, try again for something better, and are aiming to do our best to extend our learning process to the whole movement. Many of these ideas get developed in the Redstockings organizing packet called Women's Liberation and National Health Care, Confronting the Myth of America, and that packet still lays out the basic realizations which we operate with today. Even though it was published in 2001, unfortunately, not very much of it is outdated. 2001 to now, it's not outdated. In fact, some things are getting worse. And even the paltry social wage programs we already have are under relentless attack. In our public organizing over the decades, we've held consciousness-raising meetings, rallies, speakouts to spark awareness and anger about the fact that women in the United States still lack these universal programs that women in many other countries already have. Programs that free up women's time and make our and made their struggles for equality easier. Until women are freed from the unequal, unfair, and uncompensated share of the responsibility for the work of family and labor of caring for and generating the human workforce, our full liberation is not possible. This labor and responsibility must be equally shared between the sexes, and as important further, the labor and responsibility should not fall completely on the parents individually, but needs the assistance of society as a whole. And it's society as a whole that's receiving as much of the share of the benefits of the new generation as the parents do. The social wage for all, combined with an individual wage for all, is a major step toward a social system for generating and caring for the generations in which human females win the same individual rights, liberties, and personal freedoms that men enjoy. So what about my own learning process, about what has stood in the way of winning a social wage system here in the United States? It began with Red Stockings deciding to attend a conference called the First National Conference on Devising a National Healthcare System. This conference was held May 16, 1987 in Maryland. Red Stockings held a consciousness-raising workshop at this conference on a topic we probably wouldn't have been caught dead being part of before, didn't think of as a feminist issue, and thought of it as actually anti-feminist. And that was health care other than abortion, birth control, or forced sterilization. When I attended this conference, I didn't fully understand or realize how health care other than abortion, birth control, or forced sterilization could be anti-feminist. So, 2 years later, in 1989, you all probably remember a big abortion march in Washington, D.C. 2 years later then, I made a banner that's here to hold at that big 1989 abortion march in Washington with Red Stockings sisters Colette Price and Susan Jean Child that read, "Go for what you really want. Free abortion on demand," but here was the addition from the '87 conference understanding, "through national health care for all." So what was the thinking of those of us who made this banner? Well, in contrast to the groups from the 1970s who had slogans like free abortion on demand, those groups, those slogans didn't explain how abortion could be free, how it could be free, or, even more importantly, how the countries where it was free and on demand, available both ways, had won either of those battles or both. The national healthcare system, with the radical feminist women's liberation movement pressure for both on demand and how it was going to be free, is how abortion on demand can be free. The banner in 1989, however, didn't show a consciousness yet of using international comparisons with countries whose national health care systems did offer abortion to women, and didn't show yet how an existence of a feminist struggle is what won abortion on demand. So this deeper understanding is in our 2001 Red Stockings organizing packet, and it was further put to the test in our organizing in New York City as Red Stockings Allies and Veterans. The most successful campaign, I want to say, in our feminist fight here in the United States for national health insurance was in 2000 with an election referendum in Gainesville, Florida. The book is at our literature table, and it's called Universal Healthcare, an organizer's packet, documents and materials from the 2000 campaign for universal healthcare in Alachua County, Florida. It was compiled by the Alachua County Labor Party, Gainesville Area National Organization for Women, the Campus Now, and Gainesville Women's Liberation Healthcare for All project. Why did we think we could win back then, and even now? Because the data we were learning was so outrageous. The contradictions and paradoxes were so glaring. What has happened since then? We've won some things, but not nearly enough. And the data now is even more outrageous and glaring, much more. For example, the US life expectancy is 49 now in the world. Some things have gotten better with sexism. One key example is that insurance companies can no longer charge women more than men. That was an outrage that we didn't fully understand, but it was one of the reasons that insurance companies mobilized against the Equal Rights Amendment. There seems to be some other good things too, in terms of paying for contraception, but it's clear that we got nowhere near, quote, free abortion on demand, end quote, and not nearly as close to it as other countries have come. We do think if people continue to analyze, organize, mobilize, and struggle, we can make conditions better here and closer to what they should be, especially with this data all around us that is more outrageous and glaring than when our learning process was beginning to get it decades ago. Next, I want to introduce the idea of Myth America, or Myth of America. Put simply, it is the belief that we have it better here than anywhere else in the world, and that women here in the United States are the most liberated. One of the biggest obstacles in the United States to us women winning what women have in other countries is that we're being lied to consistently, repeatedly, about how great we have it here and how we are the most liberated. We're being lied to also about what people have in other countries in terms of a social wage and what these gains in other countries mean for women's freedom and independence. We're talking about what will give us the ability to be financially independent from men, about a system where the employer class and individual men do not have any control over our survival or comfort, be it housing, healthcare, insurance, trying to make ends meet by combining a woman's smaller with his bigger paycheck under a family wage system. And we're talking about caring work, childcare, healthcare, hauling kids to the doctor, doing all the insurance paperwork, taking care of family members in our homes. International comparisons are a powerful way that we can understand how we can have so much more and level the playing field between men and women. One of the strategies has been going after our current healthcare system, but not healthcare itself or sexist doctors. We're talking about the way healthcare is paid for, the way it is paid that puts women in a position of dependency on men and the employer class. What are we saying here? Is healthcare just another issue feminists should add to our list of things to do? Has Red Stockings given up on the struggle with equality with men and decided to just go for the reform? Health insurance is a great example to discuss and dissect, as it is the flagship of our job-based benefit system. Our employment-based private insurance system has very bad effects on women. It shores up male privilege. It undermines our independence, our ability to stick up for ourselves at work or with men, or even our ability to leave a bad job or a bad marriage. Right now in the United States, women are caught in a trap because this insurance is tied to our jobs, or frequently, if we're married, to a partner's job. Further, because we get paid less than men, women often have to take time out from paid work for family responsibilities. And when we do take time out of work, we end up relying on others for our income, health insurance, or go without insurance entirely. If everyone were covered through a national system, we wouldn't have to rely on a partner's insurance or have health insurance depend on our job situation. When we say universal health care, we mean eliminating private insurance, creating a public-funded system, funded out of corporate taxes and in proportion to wealth and income. This provides health care to everyone free of charges, co-pays, deductibles, and paperwork. The government pays for all. It is the single-payer model of health care, along with all the other social programs I briefly touched upon. So to end, women's liberation means extending to females the individual rights and liberties that the so-called world's democracies and republics have long structured exclusively or primarily for males, and that which came through the medium of the one breadwinner family, with the breadwinner intended to be the male. The social wage for all, combined with a fair individual wage for all, is a major step towards free and equal development for all that is at the heart of women's liberation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisa. Our next speaker is a pioneer. She's one of the smartest women I have ever met, and that happened to be Kathie, Sarachild. And she's one of the women that I really admire. She's my role model. Is that she took me to the 30th anniversary of SNCC conference, where SNCC was an organization that did the civil rights movement back in the early 60s. And I had an attitude. I had a real attitude about going to that conference. It's because, what the hell I want to go for? And, but by her forcing me to go, is that my eyes was really open to some real truth reality. And I don't think, and maybe it's because of my age or whatever, is that I could have been able to commit myself and put myself in that line of fire for, she did it for me. You know, she was putting her life on the line. And at the time, I had such an attitude, I just didn't realize, you know, how European America really did care about what was happening to other peoples of other race. And I think at that point, at that conference and at that celebration, I realized if someone like that could care for me and don't even know me, what can I do if I just take that same risk, and how much change that I can bring to somebody's life, our society. And on that note, I'd like to introduce my hero, Kathie.
Thank you, Betty. Good morning. Good morning. This is supposed to be a panel on what two organizations with roots in a close collaboration in the 1960s and from the beginning considered themselves, ourselves, radical and committed to root and branch change in the United States are doing today to get full liberation, as you've heard. A revolutionary society that really does aim to achieve liberty and justice for all, including the full liberation of the long oppressed female half of humanity. For this panel, we broke down what we are doing into some major areas of our work. Two are mainly action and campaign areas.
in which, like a good union for workers, we try to win some relief for women in areas of our daily lives in which we are oppressed as women. Notice I'm using the word relief, not full liberation, not full equality. That, we realize, is a much bigger, longer battle, and in the meantime, we could use a little relief. And also, that relief ought to strengthen us and help us continue in the longer battle. In winning some relief, we hope to strengthen and build the union of women. This is also a major part of what we argue needs to be done, and a major area of our work. The theory is that winning the relief for women will help build the union because more women see the useful results, the gains of our collective efforts, and will want to join, and will also help to pay for it. This union of women for women's liberation, we believe, will be needed as a power base to win women's liberation, a power base that will make the gains less fragile. So it doesn't do that much good to go for concrete gains by themselves, just for their own sake. We feel we've learned from our own women's liberation experience, and also from reading about other liberation movement experiences, that we're wasting our time if we only fight for concrete gains. We need at the same time to use our struggle for relief in our lives to build the union that was the source of this relief. And also, as it grows, will become a major force for full liberation. And we also try, while we're fighting for the relief in our lives and the lives of other women, the concrete gains, we also try to learn as much as we can from the fight so we can be even more effective in winning relief for women and building the feminist union. This is another part of what is to be done and what we do. Learning as much as we can means taking the time for learning, putting precious resources of time for other things into the learning. This learning and teaching, what I guess you could call, we call our work on theory, strategy, and tactics, or theory work, for short, or theory power, like the idea of history power. The purpose of theory is to sharpen our and the movement's aim, getting us closer and closer to the bullseye in every struggle, and also to win our big overarching struggle for women's liberation and a world of freedom and justice for all. Improving the theory, we've concluded, doesn't just sharpen our aim, but resolves more and more differences among women, and so helps building the Women's Liberation Union. So this is the theory front part of Red Stocking's think tank program for our own work. Strategy is also part of the Think Tank for Action program, the learning part of the program, of course, and the teaching part. And this think tank work on theory and strategy are what Red Stockings has long emphasized the need for and has focused on really since 1969. The organizing of consciousness-raising groups and the use of the consciousness-raising method of pooling women's individual present-day experience as a reality check on what is going on in our lives has been central to developing theory and strategy in Red Stockings since 1969. As the Red Stockings Manifesto proclaimed, quote, "Consciousness raising is the only method by which we can ensure that our program for liberation is based on the concrete realities of our lives." And we continue to use consciousness raising for our own learning and for engaging other women and recruiting them for the larger union. But we are now combining what we call history for activist use with consciousness raising, as you have already heard something about. History for activist use, what is it really? In a sense, it's consciousness raising about our women's liberation experience, ours and other women's, our experience with trying to change things collectively for women. Whereas the consciousness raising when the movement began, when we first began trying to change things for women, usually only involved pooling and analyzing our experience as women in our individual lives, in struggling as individuals to make our lives better as women. That big term, history, like the word theory, got mystified for us. History, we came to realize, just meant experience. And women's history meant women's experience and how it changed over time and what made it change. And women's liberation history meant women's liberation movement experience. The experience of trying to change things. The experience of trying to change history and change the world for women. What history for activist use we are mining, history for activist use, we are mining past women's liberation experience and the experience of other women's liberation movements and revolutions to get ideas for understanding action, strategy, and tactics today. The word theory first got similarly demystified when we realized what we were doing in consciousness raising was theory, helping to develop the much-needed theory for women's liberation. It wasn't therapy, as it was so often called by its opponents, because there were opponents to consciousness raising. It didn't just happen. It was a big debate. If theory is an explanation of the facts, consciousness raising was helping us to come up not only with more and better facts, but more plausible and verifiable explanations of the facts of our lives we were seeing in a new way. Now, it's very difficult to decide what to talk about next because that's all we can do here, really, touch on things. Should I run down a little more what we've come to realize about that much abused by the Academy and also by the left word theory means? I could say more about it because there's more to it than I've said. And how that differs from a strategy. Or should I go into what our groups feel we've learned about building the feminist union, what we feel we've learned about the organizational structure and leadership questions that will help the Women's Liberation Union last this time, to keep radical women's liberation organizations from disintegrating and going up in smoke only a few years after only a few years of impact that begins to erode when the organizations dissolve. This is what happened at the women's liberation movement's highest point of impact. All we can do today, really, is sketch out some of the things we've been doing and why. If what you've been hearing has interested you and you want to hear more and talk about it more, I would suggest that you get together some friends or co-conspirators or your college department to raise the money to hold an event, to have one of us come and talk to you some more about these things. Or arrange to take the women's liberation class when it's given, or possibly fund one of us to come to your community to give the class. Or you can read our material that's available right on the website, or order the literature, or buy some of what's on the table back there. Or volunteer to help us research or in the archives. Take some assignments, or help raise some funds for our programs, the think tank and Archives for Action, or help with the analysis work on both the Birth Control Project and Birth Control Includes Abortion, or the Social Wage Campaign. Helping to maintain the staying power of Red Stockings radical feminism, independent from the influence and pressure of the money power, is what we call dues-paying feminism. It's another part of our program, part of our answer to what is to be done, that we're actually doing. financial self-reliance for radical feminism, for the Radical Feminist Union, based on the nickels and dimes of working women as our main economic foundation. Who would be free must strike the blow was a classic radical slogan that the British militant suffragists used. And we add, who would be free must also finance the blow. Or, as the signers of the Declaration of Independence put it, we pledge our lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to the cause. We hope you will all work with us, but if you don't work with us, join or support another feminist organization. We need to keep the feminist union going and growing, sharpening its aim and gaining in firepower. Thanks, all of you, for coming.
We have 15 minutes for questions and answer. So if you want to ask questions, I think you could line up at that mic and we will take your questions. And we're going to try to keep the questions down to about 2 minutes.
So thank you for the presentation. I have 3 points, one with question. So I wanted to know, in terms of the social wage, if you guys have considered a guaranteed livable income. There is a movement right now going on around the world to argue for a guaranteed livable income, not attached to work. And we think, as anti-violence workers working with women who have been leaving violent situations with men, that this is an absolute answer to some of the reasons why women are trapped in abusive relationships. If they had their independent income that had nothing to do with wage labor, that we would be in a better situation. So I'd urge you to look at, it's called the BN Conference. It's happening in June in Montreal. The last one happened, I think, in South America. But it needs a feminist voice. There's not enough feminists in that discussion, and I think it's a really important discussion. Also, in terms of analyzing, I find it very useful to analyze by thinking through. A feminist colleague had told me this once, and I never forgot it, is when you fight for the women with the least, every other woman benefits. So when you're analyzing, you always think, who are the women that are on the bottom? Poor women, working class women, women of color, Aboriginal women, and if your program and plan works for them, then everybody else is going to be okay. So I just wanted to pass that analysis, because I think that it's a useful one to go forward, and when you're doing your analysis to think about fighting for the woman with the least will get all women more. And the only other thing I wanted to say is we have a national health care program in Canada. It's not very good. It's better than the States, but everything is, and we always defend ourselves by saying we're better than the States, which actually means nothing. But having said that, we did have a really important abortion fight in Canada before my time, and we do have almost abortion on demand. And I just wanted to give you some cautions about that. So a woman can call an abortion clinic and make an appointment and get an abortion. Going to see a doctor is free, so that's not a problem. Getting an ultrasound is free, so that's not a problem. Where we have problems is in rural areas. So when you're fighting for it, those are the women who end up not getting what they need, is because they're in a poor state in your instance. So for us, the Transition House makes an exception and will house any woman that's coming from a smaller town that needs an abortion. We mostly house women who are escaping violent men, but we see the fight for women's bodily autonomy is so close to the fight for violence against women that we do that. So I just wanted to give you some of those warnings, and it's getting harder and harder for women in smaller towns, and they're starting to do user fees and things like that to try to limit the access to abortion. So heads up.
But generally it's free? And up through the second trimester? Wow.
I'd like to know, what reason did the Obama administration give for dropping their appeal in regard to the morning after pill?
The reason for dropping the appeal?
Yes.
Trying to remember. I think that it was nothing positive. It was nothing endorsing the morning after pill. I think it became clear that they were not going to win the lawsuit.
Yeah.
And so they decided not to spend any more resources on it. It was kind of like, all right, we keep losing and losing and losing, so finally we'll just drop it.
And the judge just indicted them in this language, like, you guys are stalling, this is all political, I mean, they were, if you read the language of the judge's ruling, it's just beautiful. It's like he copied from our.
The one thing they did do on their way out was when they finally relinquished this position of trying to block access, they granted an exclusivity deal to Teva Pharmaceuticals, which was the main company manufacturing Plan B, Plan B One Step it's now called, which resulted in generics being stuck behind the counter. So even when they finally dropped it, they also made a decision that would benefit the pharmaceutical company and not women. And now since then, they even have said, okay, we changed our minds, probably because they looked really bad from this. We changed our minds. We're now going to let some of the generics be out on the shelf, which in our argument would hopefully start to bring the price down a little bit with a little competition. But they said, in order to give you more exclusivity, we'll still make them keep the label that says it's only supposed to be for ages 17 and up, even though there's no scientific backing of that at all. So the level of mangling of the science and the politics, anti-birth control politics and sort of anti-woman politics involved continues to be really astounding.
Can you just tell me the name of the case?
Tummino et al. V. Hamburg.
Thanks.
Hamburg, I believe.
Okay, thanks.
I was one of the all. It was fun.
Yes,
It was
yes,
great to
Carol.
sue the federal government, I'm telling you. I used to wake up thinking, I'm suing the Bush administration. Now I'm suing the Obama administration.
Hi, I wanted to ask Carol, you said after your participation in the Miss America protests that you lost your job and you were like blacklisted and whatever, permanent record. How were you able to work and support yourself after that?
It was amazing. The head of the American Civil Liberties Union in our town, right, who represented me when I got fired and got all this information from my personnel file showing they had clippings of the newspaper articles and whatnot, was also the head of the Department of Child Psychiatry at the university. So he said, don't worry, he said, you can come and work for me, and I don't care. He was protesting them. So I go there, I'm working for him, I don't get paid. I say, what's going on? And the university had said that I had sabotaged the thing, so I was on their blacklist. So Dr. Adams said to me, the only way I'm going to be able to pay you is if you work here as a graduate assistant, because then it goes through a different office in the university structure. So he said, go find some department to let you go into their graduate program, and then you can get a research assistantship in my department. I had no desire to go back to school at all, but I went over to the philosophy department and I said, hi, I have an automatic research assistantship. Will you let me come into your department? And since the philosophy department then was where all the radicals were, and we were organizing the Venceremos Brigade out of the philosophy department. Anyway, they were happy to have me, but that's another story in itself, because I was the only girl in the philosophy department, which back then was rough. But so I got paid around the corner. It didn't go through the university. But then when I finally graduated, I went to get a state job as a Title I teacher, poverty program. I was blacklisted then. And finally, they just passed this information on, and sabotage, it doesn't sound that great. So I had to go up to the state personnel office And they looked at me very sternly and they said, "Surely, Miss Giardina, now that you have gone back to school and you recognize the error of your ways." I mean, can you believe this, right? And I could either say, or I could say, yes, I recognize. So I humiliated myself and recognized the error of my ways, and they took me off the blacklist. So, yeah.
Could I just quickly ask Annie, how did you become a plaintiff in the case? Because I would think you'd have to show like damages and.
We at that time were doing the work of passing out the morning after pill to women who needed it, and that was in defiance of the prescription requirement. So the Center for Reproductive Rights thought that was a good example. We were saying that we wanted to be able to have anyone have the morning after pill and to be able to give it to someone without that being an act of breaking the law. So I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if I can say it better than that, but they felt that campaign itself kind of brought us together with the Center for Reproductive Rights.
Yeah, I remember that action. I couldn't make it. Okay. Thank you.
I want to thank you for such attention to archiving the history of liberation in this country as well as in other countries, and for emphasizing the importance of study and having your schools in various centers, and for continuing to try to build a national movement. I just would like to call attention to something else that I think you should be studying, and that is what's happening in public schools today in this country. The attempt to privatize, the takeover by large corporations of publications and testing, and the oppression of teachers and children in public schools as a result. I think that's something that you should all be studying and joining the movement to end testing in public schools.
Amen, sister. Amen.
Jen Sunderland, could you speak just briefly to how we've been trying to raise consciousness, speak from experience on this issue in New York and our organizing on public education as women's liberation?
Yeah, I mean, we're just really trying to figure out what our theory is around that. As a mother of a second grader whose father was actually the CIO of Edison Schools, which was one of the first schools that launched this whole campaign. So I really got to see from the inside what was being established as the education model for charter schools that were running for profit. And I'm also an educator for 22 years now of very young children. But the main thing that I see where it fits into our theory is it's stealing my time as a woman because the teacher's so overwhelmed by the ratios that she constantly needs parents in the class to help during the day. And who are those parents? Predominantly women, because either they're staying at home because it's too hard to have a job that allows you to pick the child up at 2:30, or they have flexible work for the same reason. And so it's stealing my time in that way, and then it's also pushing those of us who think that we want more from the education system, and the women alongside me and the fathers, like the mothers and fathers alongside me who don't have the same dedication politically that I do to supporting a public system, their approach is to take the children out of school completely and either pay for an individual who will teach them or do homeschooling, which is then again stealing our time and undermining the public system by continuing to feed some public funds, which they say is justified because it's not equal to the amount of what the public school will get, into these privatized for-profit programs that willingly will openly say that they select students. So they select the best performing students, they select the families that are most involved, and coach out the other families so that the surrounding public schools are then easily labeled as failing and closed. So yeah, it does dovetail with our feminist theory around the social wage program, but it's really complicated to say in a clear, concise way. But I am torn as a feminist, as a mother, as someone who believes in social justice, where my time is going to go, you know, movement-wise. So.
One of the things that we're doing in Florida about that is that we're really taking an in-depth look at the school-to-prison pipeline that really affecting minority girls and Hispanic girls, and that we're also addressing this FCAT and going to a core program, because what we have realized is public school is no longer teaching our kids. They're just teaching our kids the FCAT. And that, and putting kids in charter schools, we are finding that they're just union busting. And then when we look at what's really happening to girls, and especially minority girls with the system, is that we're creating, well, these girls are being created, well, once they get in school and lose that attention span because they've been taught a test and they act out, as they directly is in the detention center on their way to prison. So that's one thing that we need to begin to look at also.
Yeah. There's actually some really great theory out there coming from the position of an educator that is really talking about how that is actually the militarization of our educational system and the effect that it's having, especially on communities of need. So
we should probably credit just briefly the Dream Defenders in Florida are doing amazing work on those issues, and the Gainesville chapter of National Women's Liberation, including Betty, has been trying to forge connections with them and work with them.
And who were sitting in the Capitol for many days, fighting for.
It's my understanding this conference attracted twice as many people as they expected. And I wonder if you agree with me that mobilizing women, it might be a good idea to have this kind of conference all over the country to mobilize women, especially with the elections that are coming up. I see the potential to really make a difference.
Could you hear what she said?
Well, Red Stockings actually did recently hold
I
it.
didn't hear the question.
Yeah.
Really.
It's hard to hear from whether it was.
She thinks we should hold this kind of a conference all over the country, and Annie was going to respond that we just
this
had
big conference
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We're out of time, I think.
Are we?
Yes, we are. We're 3 minutes over time.
We're about out of time, and some things that is that Carol Giardina book is for sale outside on the table, and in the back we have information where if you want to get involved, we have literature for sale, and any information you want to find out about our organization and what we do is where those young ladies back in the back with the table. So hope you come join us.
Thank you.
Dues paying.
Thank you.